Tonight on Politicat, the Iran aftermath, a rare display of bipartisanship in Congress.
And money in politics, how billionaire candidates like Michael Bloomberg are affecting the 2020 race.
Plus, a split in the Democratic Party, how the progressive-moderate divide played out in New Hampshire.
All that and more coming up on Politicat. It's your politics.
Right now. Good evening and welcome to Politicat. I'm Justin Sweetwood.
And I'm Amanda Rooker. We begin tonight with Congress's response to the American intervention in Iran. The Senate on Thursday passed a bipartisan war powers resolution aiming to limit President Trump's use of military force against Iran. The vote was 55-45, with 8 Republicans siding with Democrats to pass the measure. The resolution would require President Trump to seek congressional authorization before taking military action against Iran. However, it would still allow the president to order strikes in cases of self-defense against an imminent attack. This vote comes just over a week after the Senate voted to acquit Trump of impeachment charges and nearly 6 weeks after the president ordered the killing of an Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani, without congressional approval. To talk more on that, we'd like to welcome our panel. We have Dominic Bayer of NU College Republicans and Zach Miller, NNN's political correspondent. Now, as I mentioned before, 8 Republican senators voted in favor of the bill. Zach, how significant is this bipartisan support? What do you think it means?
Well, it's still not going to be enough. The next thing that this bill is going to do is going to go to the president's desk and he's going to veto it. And 8 Republican votes is not enough to override the veto. It's surprising there wasn't more support behind this. If you look at the optics, this is Congress voting to not give Congress the authority on the side of the 45 Republicans to oversee President Trump's further war intervention in Iran. It is admirable that 8 Republicans did step out of line to do this, but it's not going to be enough.
Yes. So what do you think, Dominic? Does it mean anything, that bipartisan support? I know you said from the optics, it should seem like there should have been more Republicans willing to cross the aisle and support this measure. What do you think? Does it mean?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense that 8 Republicans would defect to vote with the Democrats on this. There is a substantial libertarian and isolationist contingent in the Republican Party right now. But I think the fact that the vast majority of the party stick with President Trump is a clear indication of how much his support, dominates the Republican caucus in the Senate.
Now, Dominic, during Trump's impeachment trial, Mitt Romney was the sole Republican who voted to convict the president. Do you think Romney going against the grain made Republicans this time around more comfortable siding with the Democrats?
Not really. I think the 8 Republicans who voted against, they knew this wasn't really going to change anything at the end of the day. So they felt free to vote their conscience on this issue. I think it's pretty much separate from impeachment. But
at the same time, those 8 Republicans, they had to know during the impeachment trial that, 8 Republicans also probably wouldn't make a significant difference. So do you think the two events
Right,
are related?
but I think they're playing a lot more to their constituency with the Iran powers resolution vote. Just because a pretty substantial contingent of the GOP base is fed up with foreign wars in the Middle East. So it's not as dangerous a vote as voting against the president, which President Trump has a 95% approval rating among Republicans or so. So that's a lot more dangerous a vote.
Zach, do you see the events as unrelated, or was Romney a trailblazer just a few weeks ago?
This is more of a separation of powers issue than about the current president. The previous presidents, Obama and Bush, have abused the AUMF after 9/11, using an authorization to go after Al-Qaeda in order to branch out and attack other targets without declaring war. This is more a ongoing issue than anything having to do with impeachment or President Trump directly. All 3 presidents have expanded the right of the executive branch to declare war unilaterally.
Well, as we just talked a little bit about that veto, the 55-45 vote did fall short of that 2/3 majority necessary to override what is almost certainly going to be a presidential veto. Dominic, I want to ask you a little bit about this. Senator Rand Paul said that, quote, "It's not so much about rebuking the president, it's rebuking all of us for not giving permission for being at war so long," quote. What do you think of that take?
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense from Rand Paul's, kind of libertarian constitutionalist perspective, where, America shouldn't be engaging in costly, unnecessary wars abroad, and if it does engage in a conflict, it should have congressional approval. So he's really trying to shift the focus away from President Trump, because he doesn't want to cut ties with President Trump. He doesn't want to distance himself from President Trump. He's been one of his most ardent supporters. And shift the focus to the Bush and Obama administrations and condemn their foreign interventionism as a way to justify this vote. So at the same time, he's able to avoid insulting President Trump, angering the GOP base, while also sticking to his principles and condemning past administrations.
Yeah, so for you, you think this is more about relations with Trump than just about Soleimani?
Yeah, I think really the fact that every single Democrat voted against President Trump on this vote is an indication they're playing to their base, being anti-Trump, which makes sense. Well, for the GOP senators, you can tell for the most part, except for people like Mitt Romney, they're trying to send the message, oh yeah, we're with you, President Trump. What we're trying to do is we're trying to condemn what the Bush and Obama administrations did. So President Trump still has a very key role in this debate.
Zach, is this situation more about just Iran and Soleimani, as Senator Rand Paul said in his quote that Amanda just mentioned?
This is about whether or not Congress has the authority to intervene in the president's military actions on foreign soil. As I said, for years, the president has had the ability to, without declaring war, strike targets. This is not our first drone strike, and it probably won't be the last. This bill, in its current form, would even allow the president to continue to have authorization to attack targets if he felt that there was an imminent threat, which is a loophole that people have used in the previous AUMF for years to attack targets that did not have any direct ties to Al-Qaeda or pose a direct threat, as in they're about to launch a terrorist attack.
And Zach, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said that the resolution sends a warning to President Trump. Do you think the president sees it that way? Do you think he sees it as a warning?
If it's a warning, it's not a particularly strong one. President Trump is still going to be able to launch drone strikes with very little accountability in the current climate.
And Dominic, even Schumer said that he was surprised that there was a display of bipartisanship. Do you think Trump is at risk of losing any GOP support in Congress?
Not really on most of the really important matters. The GOP is completely behind him. You can tell just by looking at the impeachment vote. And I think on some symbolic measures, they're going to vote against it, but never when it's really going to have any real consequences. I think the party's pretty much united behind President Trump, with the exception of Mitt Romney every so often.
Zach, what do you think? Do you think Trump is at risk of losing some support in the GOP?
Not at this point, so close to the upcoming elections. People want to keep their seats.
All right, Zach and Dominic, thanks so much. And we're going to be back with more Politicat after this.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Northwestern break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
For this week's Money Minute, Zach Miller is going to give us a little context regarding presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg's unprecedented spending in the 2020 Democratic primary. Zach?
Thanks, Justin. Michael Bloomberg is a difficult figure to categorize. At the turn of the century, he was a Democrat. In 2001, he was elected mayor of New York City as a Republican. By then, Forbes estimates that he already had a net worth of nearly $5 billion. Today, he is worth more than $60 billion, making him the 12th richest person alive. Bloomberg won re-election in 2005. 2 years later, he left the Republican Party and remained an independent until 2018, when he once again became a registered Democrat. Through all this, Bloomberg's policy goals have remained fairly consistent. He leans to the left on issues like gun control, abortion, and climate change, and to the right on healthcare, taxes, and policing. He has donated millions of dollars to candidates from both sides of the political aisle. By entering late and outspending the rest of the Democratic field, Bloomberg is gambling that he can win over late deciders, voters who either didn't follow the primary until now or who weren't yet satisfied with anyone in the crowded race. This is why Bloomberg's campaign spent an estimated $400 million of the candidate's own money in less than 4 months, primarily in the 14 Super Tuesday states that vote on March 3rd. To put this in context, Bloomberg's nationally televised 1-minute Super Bowl ad cost roughly $10 million, which is just over 1/100th of 1% of his net worth. But most of his spending has gone towards relatively cheaper TV and radio ads, most of which cost between $2,000 and $50,000 apiece. With these, he has strategically inundated the airwaves in cities across the U.S. Bloomberg is spending so much so rapidly that super PACs are beginning to worry he could potentially raise the price advertisers charge for television and radio commercials by dominating the supply. He has also spent over $40 million on digital ads. This includes targeted advertisements such as the ones offered on Google, Facebook, and Instagram, as well as sponsored content from popular social media users or influencers. The number of sponsored posts and memes grew so fast that on Friday, Facebook announced it would change its political advertising policy. The changes will require influencers to label branded content. Accounts still will not have to report how much they are paid. Michael Bloomberg has barely scratched the surface of his $60 billion war chest, and yet he has already outspent every other candidate currently running for president. Whether or not he wins the primaries, this will have a lasting impact on election strategy and campaign finance well into the future. Amanda, Justin?
Thanks so much, Jack. And just a few days ago, Bloomberg passed the $400 million plateau in ad spending. And just for some context, Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg have each spent around $40 million, Elizabeth Warren just north of $20, and Joe Biden $12 million on ads. And according to a new NPR, PBS, and Marist poll, Bloomberg has catapulted into second place nationally in the polls. Zach, is it fair to draw the conclusion that this massive spending is the sole reason why Bloomberg has skyrocketed in the polls?
It's not the sole reason, but it's probably the largest one. An argument could be made that any candidate entering this late in the race would have had a good shot with people who were tired of the candidates, who were frequently attacking each other. Maybe they didn't want to see anyone who had been slung around too much on the debate stage. They would have liked the fresh face. I don't know that Bloomberg could have particularly been that face without massive piles of cash.
And what do you think, Dominic? Is it a simple cause and effect here, or the result of a candidate putting $400 million into his campaign? We've also seen Tom Steyer pour close to $200 million into his campaign in advertisements.
I think it's a mix of both. I think Bloomberg couldn't have gotten to where he is right now without spending those $400 million. I think because they've enabled him to really shape the narrative and sell the message, and especially among low information voters, to really create this positive image in their minds of Mike Bloomberg. The thing is, he also has a product to sell. I mean, he's a man who was mayor of America's biggest city for 8 years and did a pretty good job at it, and a very, very successful businessman. And he also somebody who can, project this image of a moderate who is appealing to Republican voters too. I mean, somebody who was moderate Republican in the past and doesn't have as much baggage for moderate and lightning voters as most of his contenders are. So I'd say it's a mix of both who Mike Bloomberg is and the phenomenal amount of money that he spent on the campaign.
Yeah, well, according to that same poll that Justin just mentioned, Bloomberg has gained 15 percentage points since December, with Joe Biden dropping 9 points. Do you think that moderate voters see Bloomberg as now the only option to defeat President Trump, or the best option to defeat President Trump?
I think he certainly has made a viable case for his ability to out-advertise the competition. He has already outspent Donald Trump, who can claim that he is the sole Republican frontrunner. And if the Democrats can back one single candidate, then they could get behind them. But Bloomberg wouldn't necessarily need the support of the entire party to bring up the fundraising numbers that, other candidates might have wanted.
And Dominic, let's talk Iowa, New Hampshire a little bit. Do you think that Biden's weak performance there kind of alienated former Biden supporters and maybe pushed them towards Bloomberg?
Oh, I think that's definitely the case. I think a lot of Biden's spiel before the Iowa and New Hampshire primaries was, oh, I'm the front runner. I'm the person who can unite the whole party against President Trump. But as the results show, he's no longer the front runner. So once that illusion has been deflated, he loses a lot of his appeal. I mean, he's no longer even the leading moderate in the primary right now. And so a lot of the voters, I think, are not just jumping to Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar's campaigns, but also they see Bloomberg as somebody who can just pick up the slack and just spend $1 billion or more on his campaign.
Now, Dominic, in 24 hours, we're going to see Michael Bloomberg on the debate stage for the first time in Nevada. What do you think he has to prove tomorrow night?
I think he just needs to survive. He doesn't need to prove that much. He just needs to avoid receiving a knockout blow, because everybody's just going to be going after him. Except maybe Bernie Sanders, because he's the current front runner, but everybody's going to want to take Mike Bloomberg down just because he's sapping all the support that could be going to other moderate candidates. And as long as he's able to ward off attacks and explain his past record, I think he'll be fine. But if he's not able to do that, he's just going to get destroyed.
Do you think he'll be able to explain his past record without taking too many blows from the opposition?
These debates have largely centered around income inequality, and he's the richest man to ever run for president. It's hard to imagine him coming out unscathed, but if he can stay calm, stay organized, and present his policy ideas, which he hasn't quite had to do yet on the national stage, then he might emerge as someone that the entire country can see, oh, he's a viable candidate.
And Zach, he's already faced a lot of criticism for his stop and frisk policy as New York City mayor, and honestly, just for being a billionaire in general. Do you think the primary goal of his opponents right now is to halt the momentum?
Yes. I think that every candidate is thinking about this right now, except maybe for Bernie Sanders, who has his own fairly unified base, which probably would not find much overlap with a centrist billionaire. But Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, even Klobuchar to some extent, should be very worried about this up-and-coming candidate.
Dominic, I feel like we saw that in New Hampshire too, just after Pete Buttigieg takes Iowa. A lot of candidates, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, almost took the New Hampshire debate as an opportunity to stop Buttigieg in his tracks. Do you think we're going to see that tomorrow night with Bloomberg?
Oh, I think that's definitely going to be the case. Mostly Biden, but I think also Buttigieg and Klobuchar are going to be going after him, try to end the bleeding of moderate support to Bloomberg. It's going to be fun.
And Zach, what do you think this says kind of about the state of politics in general, that now massive spending might be enough to be relevant in the polls?
I think, campaign spending has always been an issue. We've been talking about this since Citizens United and well before. We always knew this was a possibility. The fact that we now have a Democratic figure with so much money shows that we are past the era of the Koch brothers, where billionaires need to hide behind other candidates that can seem more appealing. I think that image was shattered with the election of Donald Trump.
Well, let's think, if he wins the nomination, do you think a general election then between two billionaires is at all problematic?
It would entirely depend on how much money you have. If you're a billionaire, I would think that's pretty good for you. If you are the type of person who's worried about income inequality, you actually might have a fairly clear choice. Bloomberg has spent billions over the past years on philanthropic projects. He has demonstrated a clear interest in helping out the less fortunate, although he has still hoarded most of that money to himself. I can see how that might be an issue to people looking at a general election between two billionaires.
All right, well, we'll have to leave it there. We'll be back with more Politicat after this.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Sanders fine, we will lead. We will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, spread for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
At Northwestern University, we are pioneering innovation and achieving excellence across every imaginable discipline. At Northwestern University, the possibilities are endless.
Welcome back to Politicat. Now, before we get into headlines tonight, we're going to chat a little bit about an interesting talking point that's been raised in the days following the New Hampshire primary. Bernie Sanders came out victorious with 25.7% of the vote, although the more moderate candidates in Amy Klobuchar, Joe Biden, and Pete Buttigieg combined for over 50% of the vote. This raises the question of whether the Democratic Party at its core still prefers more moderate policy over the more progressive reforms Sanders has been pushing for. Are people making something out of nothing here, or do you think there really is something here?
This has been a divide since the day the campaign began. At the beginning, it was Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren versus Joe Biden, and with all the other candidates in the middle. As the campaign has gone on, you've seen people kind of draw a line in the sand. These are the center candidates. These are the left candidates. A year ago, there wouldn't have even been a question of calling some of those candidates that are now centrists Democrats. This is a fairly stark divide in the Democratic Party that people need to be paying attention to. Whether or not you can make a generalization about the Democratic Party leaning one way or another, it's not quite so simple. There's people on both sides.
Dominic, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think in this context, progressive and moderate are really relative. And I think if you look at the field, they are to the left of every prior Democrat president. I mean, every single one of the people running right now, maybe with the exception of Bloomberg, are more liberal than President Obama and President Clinton. So the fact that, maybe a few more people lean towards the more moderate end than towards Bernie Sanders, I think is really not an indication that the Democrat Party is a moderate, a centrist party, or even conservative. I think really the median has really gravitated left, and I think that's the important point to focus on.
Dominic, do you think if there was one progressive candidate, because in 2016 we just saw essentially Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders, it was that simple, a choice between two candidates essentially. Do you think if we saw one progressive candidate, say Warren or Sanders, against one moderate candidate, Biden, Bloomberg, Buttigieg, that the Democratic Party might vote in a different way? Because if you just look at, ideology-wise, they preferred a more moderate centrist candidate, but Bernie Sanders comes out on top.
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, the thing is, people like to do this like, hypothetical polling, one-on-one. But I think for the most part, that really just doesn't reflect on the reality. We'd have to get to the point where, you actually have one against the other. And I think for the most part, some people do vote on policy. Some people do know what candidates' platforms stand for. And are well informed. But for the most part, people don't vote based on policy. They vote based on what the candidate represents to them. So maybe most of the Democratic Party kind of feels like Sanders' anger against the current political and economic system represents them better, even if they're more moderate than he is, or maybe vice versa. But I think we'll have to wait and figure that out.
Yeah. And Zach, do you think it's possible that Sanders is really benefiting here from the crowd of moderates that are all vying for that nomination right now?
I think so. It's been surprising that Elizabeth Warren has not been gaining quite so much. She did outperform her expectations in Iowa, but for the most part, people have stopped paying attention to her campaign so much as they have Bernie Sanders and the center wing of the party. The fact that there are 3 and now 4 major center candidates running against Bernie Sanders, who seems to be the kind of hallmark of the left side of the party, is very beneficial for him going into the rest of the primaries and hoping to walk out with at least a plurality.
All right, Zach and Dominic, thank you so much for some great discussions tonight, but let's actually shift gears a little bit and have some fun for our game Headlines. As always, I'm going to read 3 statements. 2 of them are true, 1 of them is not, and our panelists have to find the lie. Are you guys ready?
Totally.
Yep. Okay, first, due to a lack of snowfall in much of the Northeast so far this year, the Pew Research Center estimates 14,000 fewer snowmen have been built this year compared to last year. Fewer snowmen. Next, in an interview with Telemundo, 2020 Democratic candidates Amy Klobuchar and Tom Steyer couldn't name the president of Mexico. And finally, in response to a video of a passenger reportedly punching the reclined seat in front of them, Delta's CEO said that passengers should ask the person behind them before reclining out of courtesy. Dominic, which
I'm going to
one?
go with the first one. It's snowed, in my personal experience and based on what I've read, a lot more this year than last year. And also it doesn't seem like the Pew Center would be doing research into how many snowmen were built. So I'm going to guess that's a lie.
Zach, Dominic is skeptical of the 14,000 fewer snowmen. Where do you come in?
I think I am also skeptical of the 14,000 fewer snowmen, just because the number's so specific.
Okay, well, we tried to catch you off guard there by giving a very specific number. It's like, all right, well, did they actually make that up? And we did make that up, so you were both correct. That is not true. The Pew Research Center did not say that.
Interesting.
I mean, maybe.
I thought it was true until I heard about Delta Airlines, and I was like,
curious.
no.
I'd be
It would be
curious to see
pretty
how
epic,
you
counting the number
measure
of snowmen each
how
year.
many snowmen
Yeah.
are made.
That
and
is
that's
true.
historically tracked over time. But
People sending in pictures of their snowmen, counting it all up. I don't know. Well, let's go to round 2. First, an attempt in Wyoming to break a world record for the most sparklers lit. It simultaneously failed on a technicality. All 1,700 people were required to light their own sparklers, but the world record was not beat because instead volunteers lit them. Next, the Girl Scouts reported seeing a 22% increase in cookie sales compared to this time last year. The organization credited more states legalizing marijuana as the reason for the uptick. And finally, NBA superstar LeBron James will soon be an author with the release of his first children's book expected in August. Zach, this time we'll start with you. Which one do you think the lie is?
This is very difficult. I have to go with LeBron James writing a children's book.
Not someone you would see as a children's book author?
I would totally see him as a children's book author. This is a process of elimination answer.
Interesting. All right,
I'm gonna
Dominic,
have to
what's your
disagree
take?
with you on that. I mean, every celebrity nowadays can write a book or have someone ghostwrite a book, but definitely I cannot see the Girl Scouts praising the legalization of marijuana. You know, it's a kids organization. They're not going to do that.
Well, you do happen to be right, Dominic. You do happen to be right. That was the lie. It is quite interesting. The Girl Scouts did not credit legalization of marijuana.
LeBron James, quite the professional basketball player. We have
And-
Space Jam 2. He's a movie star, and now he's an author. He just does everything.
Not even an author, a children's book
Yeah.
author. You know, that's niche.
I believe the name of the book too will be I Promise, which is the name of his school that he opened in Northeast Ohio.
That's sweet.
So-
That's really sweet.
Now he just has to build some snowmen.
Yeah, 14,000 of them.
Well, thanks again to our panel, but don't go anywhere because we'll be back in a moment for tonight's final word.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Go you Northwestern. Go Northwestern, break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, spread for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
Welcome back to Politicat. With the coronavirus death toll rising across the world, many concerns have been raised about what steps the Chinese government could have taken to prevent the outbreak. Chloe Cope has more.
Thanks, Amanda. Today, CNN reported that coronavirus has claimed nearly 2,000 lives since the Chinese government announced the outbreak on New Year's Eve, and the total number affected is continuing to rise. International criticism has been directed toward Chinese President Xi Jinping for his delayed public response. According to the New York Times, the Chinese government covered up the outbreak for 2 weeks and silenced those who tried to give warning of the situation's severity. President Xi claimed that he was monitoring the epidemic and taking measures to control it from the start. The Chinese government continued its censorship this past weekend when police detained a Chinese activist who openly criticized Xi and the government's response to the epidemic. Coronavirus has now infected people in nearly 30 different countries, including right here in America. After being quarantined on a cruise ship in Japan, 13 Americans who tested positive for the virus were recently transferred to a hospital in Omaha. And while there's plenty of blame to go around for the outbreak, it is important that the game of pointing fingers does not keep officials from solving the true issue at hand, stopping the spread of the virus itself. This is not the first time censorship in China has made addressing humanitarian crises difficult. Silencing of information around the oppression of the Uyghurs, a minority Chinese Muslim group, and the spread of the hashtag #MeToo movement have proliferated dangerous situations in the past. This censorship issue is a symptom of China's complicated position on the world stage, one that has enormous economic, political, and health-related ramifications. We'll continue to follow the story on Politicat and bring you more updates in the coming weeks.
Thanks so much for that update, Chloe. And that's all the time we have for Politicat tonight. I'm Amanda Rooker.
And I'm Justin Sweetwood. Thanks for watching. Good night.